welcome to the PT on Ice Daily Show. My name is Christina Previtt. I am lead faculty for clinical management of the fitness, athlete, pregnancy, and postpartum. Hi, Jeff. I teach the course with Kelsey Valentine, who's an internal pelvic floor physical therapist. We are an 8-week online course where we talk about all things female athleticism. And that includes for women who are trying to conceive, pregnancy, and into postpartum return to sport. And so today I wanted to talk to you guys about exercise-induced orgasm. And so this actually might be something that is a new construct for you, something that you have never heard about. And it is oftentimes broken down into two camps. So you have individuals who actually achieve enough arousal to reach orgasm during exercise. And you have some women who experience something called exercise-induced sexual pleasure, which means that they get into a state of arousal, but they are able to bring themselves down to a level that they actually do not climax during exercise. And so if this is something that is extremely new to you, I'm going to make sure I pull my notes up here. One of the things that we need to recognize is that a lot of the physiological states that occur during sexual arousal in women are actually paralleled during exercise. And I'm going to make a disclaimer right now that we have exactly one study that has looked at exercise-induced orgasm, and it was a cross-sectional study looking at prevalence and frequency of women who are active reporting symptoms of sexual pleasure. So we still have a lot to learn about this, but I think the way that we are going to get more research is for us to start talking about this. And it was something that when I was competing in CrossFit, my female friends would talk about, but we would never actually know that there was something that we could do about it. And so the way that I'm going to break this down today is we're going to talk a little bit about some of the external female genitalia that is important in sexual arousal. We're going to talk about female sexual arousal and how it relates to some of the muscles around the pelvic floor. And then we're going to try and make these parallels with what happens with exercise so we can start to maybe potentially have some sort of hypothesis for why physiologically this can happen for some women versus others. And so the main external genitalia that we're going to be talking about is the clitoris and the labia minora majora. So these are part of the external vulva. The clitoris is on the anterior hood of the vagina, and the labia, the minora and majora, are vascularly dense tissues that respond to sexual arousal. So when a woman is aroused, we are going to see a couple of different things occur. So she's going to see, and I want you to think about what happens when we exercise. So we're going to see an increase in heart rate. We're going to see an increase in blood pressure, an increase in respiration rate. We're going to see an increase in blood flow, particularly to the genital area. We're going to see vasocongestion, and there's a vasodilation component and a constriction component depending on the amount of sexual arousal a woman is feeling. You're going to see vaginal lubrication, nipple erection, and during orgasm itself, you're going to see an increase in pelvic floor muscular contraction. And so if we think about these increases in heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, blood flow, vasocongestion, and nipple erection, all of these things can occur during high intensity exercise. And so the actual parallels between these two states are actually quite shocking when you stand back and think about some of these things that are occurring. And so some of the thoughts around why women can start experiencing issues, or not, well, some people think it's an issue, but can it be experiencing sexual arousal is because of the mimicking between some of these physiological changes that occur during arousal and some of these changes that happen during physical exercise. And so when women are saying that they are experiencing some of these symptoms, oftentimes it's when intensity is very high, fatigue is extremely high, and you are working on muscles around the core and around the pelvic floor. So in CrossFit or in the barbell sports, some of the exercise that women can experience sexual pleasure from would be gymnastics movements such as toes to bar, any high repetition core exercise, things like leg raises. For women who are returning postpartum, sometimes even running and sprinting can create, when you're under that level of fatigue, feelings of sexual pleasure and arousal. Things like hamstring curls and Nordic curls, all of these things, because of the musculature pulsating around, that contract and relax around that genital area, can lead to feelings of sexual arousal. And what we also know from a secondary part is around nervous system activation. So when a woman is getting into a state of physical arousal, you're going to see this modulation and regulation of sympathetic nervous system tone, where the beginning of physical arousal, you're going to see a spike in sympathetic nervous system tone, and that's going to transfer over to more parasympathetic tone, that fight or flight going into that rest and relax. And we're seeing that type of modulation occur as well with high intensity exercise. So again, we're seeing a lot of these parallels happening. So what can a female do about it if she is experiencing these symptoms and it's unwanted? And some of the things is going to be monitoring intensity, monitoring volume around those exercises that are peaking that physical arousal state. So if you have a woman who is experiencing the increase in sexual arousal and almost achieving orgasm with things like ring dips or toast bar, then if she's experiencing it under fatigue at 10, 12 minutes, then we're going to start putting in some stops and rest intervals at that moment. If she is experiencing it whenever she is hopping on the bar and she is doing more than 15 toes to bar, we are going to work on some motor control, see if we can get our different motor recruitment patterns going. We're going to potentially stop before that threshold. So if it's usually around 15 to 20, let's get her to stop at 13. Come off the bar, take a couple of deep breaths and relax, and then try and get back on the bar again. A lot of these things that we would do in a lot of our pain management, we can also do this to try and bring back any unwanted sexual pleasure states that can happen as a result of exercise. Another thing that can occur is we're too much in that hyperventilating state, that fight or flight response, and how can we get our athletes out of that if they're experiencing symptoms of sexual pleasure that are unwanted. And so what they can do is, if they're in that high respiratory rate state, they're in that strong physical arousal state, let's get them to come off the bar and focus on breathing. And one, that's going to improve performance, but also it's going to bring that arousal state down and get it in a more manageable level so a woman can continue exercising. And so what that could be is just a couple of deep diaphragmatic breaths, really focusing on trying to bring the heart rate down, trying to maybe avoid that red line. In this case, that red line is more around sexual arousal state rather than, hitting that red line with exercise. But can we bring that threshold down? Can we allow that woman to bring her level of sexual arousal down so that she is able to continue exercising? The other thing that she might try, so modulating volume is going to be one. Trying to get out of that sympathetic nervous system state is going to be another, and going more into that parasympathetic nervous system with breath manipulation. The third thing that they can do is start working on pelvic floor relaxation. In regards to sexual function, we know that women with stronger pelvic floors are going to, in general, have more sexual pleasure and have a stronger sexual function than women who have weaker pelvic floors. There is obviously some nuances in that. That's not just a blanket statement, but tends to be the trend. And so can we focus on some pelvic floor relaxation? So if we have a lot of, we're working at high levels of intensity, especially under fatigue, we're going to have our pelvic floor firing on all cylinders. We're going to have all of the core muscles that you're feeding into that pelvic floor system that are going to be firing at a high level of exertion or under a lot of fatigue. We're also going to see some of the muscles in our adductors and deep glute muscles that are going to be working to try and promote performance, especially when we're in that fatigue state. So when we are getting our females to come down and have that rest interval, can we focus on some pelvic floor relaxation, especially if we don't have any issues with incontinence or worries about incontinence? Can we bring that relaxation down to, again, de-escalate some of that physical arousal state that is starting to build with increasing levels of fatigue and volume with exercise? So those are just some of the things that we can do. So if you do have a client, so here's the other thing. Many women will experience this and they will talk to their girlfriends, but they won't necessarily talk to their PT. And one reason is because we haven't really advocated for the fact that some of our physical arousal is around the pelvic floor musculature, and therefore there is something that we can do, especially if you're an internal pelvic floor PT. The second thing is that a lot of women don't understand sexual arousal and female sexual responses, and therefore they just don't know that it's actually an exercise response. It can also be something that's extremely embarrassing to talk about. I even know that coming on a podcast talking about this with thousands of other PTs is something that made me a bit nervous. And I am in this space and I'm in this world and I'm having these conversations. So I think it's important that if you are a PT and something like this is going on, making sure that you have a strong therapeutic alliance and that you feel comfortable if this is brought up, because even if your mouth doesn't say that you're uncomfortable, but your body language is showing that you're uncomfortable, it may stop the conversation. It may negatively impact therapeutic alliance. And then what we need is more research on this. We really have no idea what is going on, why physiologically this is occurring. We have some of these hypotheses that I brought on today. But because we don't have a lot of conversations happening around exercise-induced orgasm, besides, things like Cosmopolitan that calls it a coregasm and how you can achieve it today, we don't really know physiologically what's going on and how we can best help our athletes, because this is actually something that can be a negative performance indicator, right? So it may be stopping women from being able to function at, 100% of their max with these types of workouts. And if they're competitive athletes, it may be something that is negatively impacting their performance, and they could be a little bit embarrassed to talk about it. So bringing this back to clinical takeaways, number one is a lot of the physiological responses that happen when a woman is sexually aroused are actually mimicked during exercise. And therefore the idea that there is exercise-induced sexual pleasure and exercise-induced orgasm is something that I think we need to be talking more about, because it's more common than we think. When women are experiencing this, it's often with high level or high repetition volume core or lower extremity exercises. And so it can be things in CrossFit like toes to bar, leg raises, any sort of core work. And it can be hamstring curl related. Some people experience it with CrossFit in general. And if you have a woman who is experiencing these things, trying to coach her through some of these feelings, one, normalizing it, saying that, this is something that is relatively common. It's just not often talked about. And then trying to coach her through volume manipulation to make sure that she doesn't get into that heightened arousal state and has a hard time getting out of it. Trying to pull her nervous system into the parasympathetic system by utilizing deep breathing. Focusing on things like pelvic floor relaxation, because sometimes heightened EMG activity in the pelvic floor can lead to a heightened level of sexual response, which is good when that is wanted, but it is not good when it is not. And opening up that conversation to some of your female athletes, even just saying like, did you know that this happens, can sometimes open a conversation that they might not feel overly comfortable having unless you bring it up and start normalizing that conversation. Okay, I hope you guys found this helpful. I would love to hear if you guys have had any experiences with this, if you have treated this in your practice, is this something that you've even heard of before? If it is, post in the comments below. I think the more and more we open up the floodgates to these types of conversations, the more we're going to be able to normalize it for our female athletes. And I hope that we can continue this conversation offline or in the DMs or in the comment sections below. If you guys want the citation for the paper that I mentioned, the one paper that I could find on exercise-induced orgasm, let me know and I will post it in the comments. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful Monday and you will see me again soon. Bye.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the PT on Ice Daily Show. If you enjoyed this content, head on over to iTunes and leave us a review. And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Instagram at the Institute of Clinical Excellence. If you're interested in getting plugged into more ICE content on a weekly basis while earning CEUs from home, check out our virtual ICE online mentorship program at ptonice.com. While you're there, sign up for our Hump Day Hustling newsletter for a free email every Wednesday morning with our top 5 research articles and social media posts that we think are worth reading. Head over to ptonice.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up.